Well, now on Identity TV, we'll be discussing how organisations can achieve zero trust through minimal viable access for employees through high-risk third-party accounts and bots. And do remember, please do keep your questions and comments coming in. I can see some of you already been putting questions in, and I will endeavour to ask as many questions as possible. Also, the other thing is that if you particularly like a question that another member of the audience has posted already, there is the ability to like it, so I can push it up the order board so I can get a temperature check on what's really hot and what you're currently thinking of as being an important question. So do remember to do that as well. And joining Caro, we have Rob Hale, who's the Senior Security Segment Leader for EMEA at AWS, and also alongside him, Karl Lankford, who's the Regional Vice President of Solutions Engineering at BeyondTrust. Welcome, Rob and Karl, to Identity TV. Really good to have you on the show. First of all, I'd love to get your take on the key drivers for an identity programme. And we heard a lot, didn't we, from Caro, from Mike, and what they discussed. You know, how can they actually deliver that? How can people actually deliver what we've heard already? And what does zero trust actually mean to you as a concept? If I can start with you.
Yeah, thank you very much. Great to be here. I think the key thing really is that identity is the foundation stone to security policy. So if your identity isn't correct, your identity source isn't correct, then none of your other policies are going to matter. So key thing is get your identity right, and then make sure you have a single sign-on of all your permissions to that identity across all of your platforms. But don't think of permissions as static entities. They must be dynamic and they must be provided at the point they're needed and then revoked.
And Karl, same to you.
Well, for me, it's very much taking the kind of concept of security out of the world of ports and connected devices into identity. It's all about making sure that your users and your non-human users have only the access they need for the time they need it, and to make sure that's appropriate and report the fact it happened. As you heard in Caro's talk earlier, I think it was great where you mentioned about the SOC. You know, this is going to give the business the ability to answer the question, how do I know if something nefarious is happening in my network?
Oh, good old Sarbanes-Oxley, yes. We'll be talking about that quite a bit today. We thought he had gone away, but oh no, it's back with a vengeance, isn't it? I think people need to sit up and wake up to that. And Caro, anything further you wanted to add?
Yeah, I mean, I think to take the zero trust concept very simply, 15 years ago, we relied on perimeter-based security, on endpoint-based security. We don't have those parameters to operate within anymore. All we know that is our constant is our people. So we lock down our people. We ensure that those accesses are just enough and just in time. And that is really the primary principle of zero trust.
And what I found fascinating was that never trust, always verify. I
Never
think that's
trust, always
something
verify.
that people really need to keep saying, write it 100 times. The emergence of zero trust can be seen as a real mindset shift for the cyber security. It assumes that system access is already compromised and makes security decisions on the basis of identity, devices, data and context. But there are challenges too, aren't there, with users demanding ever faster access, that's what we expect day in, day out, and cloud-based structures enlarging the attack surface. So how does identity actually overcome all of those issues I've just outlined there? And if I can turn to you, Rob, to begin with.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think I've said before that everything in the cloud is an identity. So whether that's a human, whether it's a service you're running, a script you're running, that's all an identity. So you need to make sure that you have the right policies in place for those and that those policies scale. So, developers, application owners, they just want to get stuff done. They need to be able to do that in a seamless way. And the more barriers you put in place, then the more ways they're going to look to how do I get my work done in spite of the security policy. So the security policy needs to work with those users to make sure they can get things done. So, make sure that you're using multi-factor authentication, but also make sure that that authentication will spread across all the systems they need to use. Make sure the permissions are up to date, for example, and then putting guardrails to state actually what they can do without requiring additional authentication or authorization, and then what they can't do. And then you can scale your organization at the speed it wants to go at instead of being that red line at the end of the process.
Caro, anything you want to add? I can see you nodding away there.
Yes, very wise words from AWS colleagues here. Yes, certainly in the sort of the it has to be guardrailed. Everything we do now has to be contextual and policy based to really allow that frictionless experience. We don't want to stop people doing their jobs. We want to make sure their jobs are secure, safe, in the best interest of the organisation. Those accesses aren't left blowing in the breeze. We want to make sure that they use them and they're removed, they're dissolved.
And Karl, so many people watching, I'm sure, have seen lots of different new approaches in cybersecurity, lots of different buzzwords and fads come and go. What makes placing identity at the heart of Zero Trust different from all those other fads?
I think, as I said earlier, it's really taking the translation of what security used to be, how are things connecting and where are they doing those connections, to actually, let's focus on the user here. Let's focus on the process, the person who's actually carrying out the activity, because everything around it has changed in the modern computing world. What I think is really great about Zero Trust is it's forcing really strong kind of timeless principles around security, making sure the user, the person, the system has just enough access to do what they need to do.
And Rob, if we are to believe the hype, we're entering a world where passwords are no longer required. So how do you see identity supporting a passwordless, very difficult word to say, world in the context of Zero Trust?
Yeah, it's an interesting concept, and look, security and identity has to evolve, and it has to evolve so it's something that users do without knowing they're doing it. So if you can have invisible security, that's the kind of the primary aim, the nirvana, if we like, of identity and security. I don't think we're quite there yet, but we need to be putting in place the policies and the tools that make sure that users can access the data that they need to and the systems they need to, without lots and lots of different steps. So things like contextual authentication. Are you accessing a system that you haven't accessed before for some time? Do we need to make sure you have the right authentication layers there? And then using roles instead of permissions. So making sure that you're not giving permissions that are going to stay there for months or years, but providing a role that can be revoked after the job is done.
And any points you two want to add to that?
I think for me, it's just taking all of those issues and challenges that happen with a traditional business user, an application user, and making sure you're cognizant that you apply those same controls to your privileged users. Ultimately, behind the scenes, those are the accounts and identities that are really going to make wide-reaching changes if anything bad happens to them.
And passwords here to stay, Carol, or not?
Oh, I think for the moment, I advise a lot of big financial organisations, a lot of defence organisations. These guys are not getting rid of their passwords. That's the reality in the real world out there. That's what CISOs, and they're not looking at getting rid of them. They're looking at making sure it's as frictionless, secure, seamless experience for their users. They're not looking to remove passwords, but they're looking to authenticate, verify, as we've said, and then let the users do what they need to do within those guardrails.
Okay, got a great question coming in from Louisa Ward, so thank you, Louisa, for this. How do SailPoint see, is it RBAC evolving over the coming years? Traditional roles have fairly static access groups. In the new world of fine-grained access in SaaS services software, how will RBAC access requirements keep up? So just for anybody who doesn't know what RBAC is, or RBAC, just explain that.
Absolutely. Thanks for the question, Louisa. Glad you're watching. We have role-based access control, RBAC, versus a new concept that's now being discussed widely of policy-based access control, PBAC. So we're now discussing, a role which is, as Louisa rightly said, is static. You can have these rolled up entitlements, these group memberships that are pushed together, and this is your role. You can, maybe approve an invoice, something like that. Then you'll have a separate invoice for those who could set up a payee. Now, policy-based access control is really more about the guardrails we just spoke about, where you're taking contextual information and making a decision about whether that user should have access to that application, data set, etc. And that's sort of the difference there. And we are seeing more and more of our more progressive customers, much like Louisa, starting to consider these elements. These are going to be a much more frictionless experience for their end users, and a far better experience for the guys who are auditing and securely, continuously monitoring.
Brilliant. Thanks for that question. I've got a great question here from Gerald Samilia. Hopefully I've said your surname correctly. I'm sure you'll tell me if I haven't. Hello. He's even said hello. How polite. Is there a standard ZTA architecture that highlights the different components, i.e. IAM, PAM, PMF, FAPKI. We've gone acronym mad, etc., that you need to achieve a proper ZTA. So who's going to translate that for us?
I mean, I'll give it a good stab. For all my favourite acronyms, NIST is another one. And I think NIST has got a really great zero trust access or network access white paper, which kind of outlines most of the major components. I think if you take a look at that, and also I would recommend the Identity Defined Security Alliance website, have a look through some of the groups, the webinars there. They discuss this at great length. So good shout to go there, and what a great question.
Yeah, indeed. OK. We've got a question here from Paul Blair. Who's better placed to own and maintain identity and access management, IT or cyber? What would SailPoint suggest? So I think that's for you, Karl.
Sure, absolutely. Well, so if I'm wishing for things, which I'm wishing for things here, I would wish that every customer has a security, cybersecurity input into an identity security team. So that team really should be attached to cyber, should also be attached to risk, compliance, and it should be a governance function as well. So really, it's traditionally sat within IT teams. It's in the wrong place if it is. It should sit governing those IT teams really and working with them to understand how it can provide the most secure and frictionless process.
And finally, identity and access management models were originally designed to handle the needs of a single organisation, weren't they? But as companies expand, they merge or partner up, how can the identity market evolve to support that zero trust approach? And I'm going to go to you first of all, Rob.
Yeah, it's an interesting question. And the main thing is, you've got to start with that identity foundation, and that's got to be consistent across all of the organisations. Whether you are acquiring another organisation and having to merge those employees into your existing identity foundation, or if you have a supply chain, are you using a third party to do your support, for example, or to access your systems? And so this is where things like contextual analysis and policy-based access control are really, really key, because you're not just looking at what role that person is playing, you're looking at the context. Are they on a work machine? Is that machine in a secure area? Do they need access to the system, for example, 2 hours after they completed the work? Do we really need database, data access to troubleshoot a database problem? And so if you've got a good handle on the identity, then you can start to put in place consistent rules and roles into your model.
Sounds very wise. Karl, anything to add?
I think, don't forget that technology can be a big enabler here as well, and really can be the swan that's paddling under the surface for you, whilst the actual users and identities in that organisation are being enabled to work together. So I'd just say, really great to start thinking on the train of, well, how is each operating company doing their governance, doing their audit? And it will really help during the M&A process, because you can then get an understanding of actually these areas have heavy usage and are key and very important to the business for us to continue to be successful.
And Caro, final words from you from this panel.
Absolutely. What is so interesting now is what we are seeing out there is that machine learning and artificial intelligence is playing a greater and greater role in exactly what Karl just described as that paddling under the water. Those decisions are being contextualised. They're being made by our machine learning technologies and actually helping enormously in that tangle of, right, who's got these accesses? What do they mean? Should they be accepted in a certification as are they low risk, high risk? Is this a peer group outlier? All the information that was very hard for maybe an identity team to understand previously suddenly is available to them, and it's being applied in the real world. And I love talking to the customers who are really getting to grips with that now. It's fascinating. I love to see which directions they're taking it.
Well, thank you so much, panel. Obviously, you're coming back for 2 more panels, so keep those questions coming in. So thank you again to our panel. And we're going to take a quick 2-minute ad break now, and then I'll be back to talk to Kamy about how Heineken is modernising their identity access management.
Zero trust is an essential part of cybersecurity, and organizations around the world are moving quickly to put this critical framework in place. Zero trust dictates that no user should automatically be trusted, whether operating inside an organization's network or out. This means users can only gain access to resources once they've been fully authorized. The vitality of a zero trust security model relies on the integrity of user identity data and the effectiveness of access controls, including the ability to continuously monitor and adjust those controls as needed. SailPoint Identity Security helps you adopt a zero-trust security model by giving you a 360-degree view of all user access, their entitlements, and attributes in real time, enabling your organization to make accurate decisions about who should have access to which resources and when. As people join the company, leave, or change roles, access information is kept up to date continuously. SailPoint also enables you to enforce the rule of least privilege with automated role management, permissions, and access policy logic. Grant exactly the right amount of access for every single role and prevent toxic access combinations that lead to fraud or theft of data. SailPoint keeps your zero-trust security profile strong by giving you the ability to continuously monitor, analyze, and proactively respond to changes or new risks faster than ever. Get deeper visibility into user access, including access trends, access approvals, roles, and relationships with AI-driven insights. Adjust access controls as your business evolves or as new threats emerge. Measure the efficacy of your access controls. And leverage custom workflows, APIs, and event triggers to integrate identity events seamlessly with other zero-trust security solutions. In today's modern enterprise, identity security is zero-trust security.
Well, welcome back to Identity TV. I'm now joined by Kamy, Global IAM Product Owner at Heineken. And Kamy leads on their Identity Access Management Strategy and Operations and is responsible for the renewal and modernisation of Heineken's digital IAM experience. Kamy, a warm welcome to the show. Thank you so much for coming all the way. I know you got a flight from Rotterdam, so we're delighted that you're here with us. It's a truly global audience and a global TV programme today. When you think of Heineken, it's such an iconic brand, isn't it? So can you give us a little bit of background about the company? We probably think we know all about it, but I'm sure you can tell us more. And also your role at the company as well.
Sure. Really happy to be here with SailPoint Identity TV. So we brew the joy of true togetherness to inspire a better world. And our dream is to shape the future of beer and beyond to win our consumer. So we have over 300 international, regional, and local brands. We have 80,000 employees operating breweries, production plants, and cider production plants as well in over 70 countries. So as for me, I'm the Global Identity Access Management Product Owner, sitting in digital technology backbone portfolio. And we have been working Agile Scrum with a 22-strong team based in 3 locations, Amsterdam, Krakow, and India. And we'll be working Agile Scrum for the last 3.5 years.
Yeah, it's been a busy time for you, hasn't it? And I know you've got a real fascinating career history. I had a read of your biography earlier. So I think the audience would love to know a little bit about your background and particularly how identity has sat within your career.
Sure. So I started my career in Malaysia with one of the big 4 as an IT auditor. So back then, user access and administration is performed manually. So I recall that I had to vet through thousands, I would say, in my career I've done that, manual forms to actually check that the right approvals were given and then went into the system to make sure that the roles were assigned appropriately. This was the pre-workflow era, right? So my 17 years with the Big 4 gave me the opportunity to experience the evolution of identity access management. So back in the days, we have startups trying to build product maturity and organizations building homegrown identity access management systems, which is quickly out of life. So in my career, I was also very fortunate to experience how organization faces challenges in really getting identity management right. And interesting enough, in Heineken, when the product team was formed and the role became available, and I naturally pivoted to this role knowing that it's going to be super exciting.
Indeed, I bet you're pleased that it's no longer manual and it's gone to a more automated style and will continue to do so over the years. It'd be great to find out Heineken's top strategic priorities and also their long-term vision for security.
Yeah, so Evergreen is our multi-year strategy, and it is to help us focus to adapt to the fast-changing world and get stronger. And Evergreen, the name itself, is inspired by nature's resilience and its ability to renew and shape itself. And our focus here is to deliver superior balanced growth to win the hearts of consumer and consumers. And to realize this in an increasingly digital world, we need to become the best connected brewer. And what I mean here, to become the best connected brewer, is literally connect everything from our packaging line, sensors in our packaging line, the new digital channels that we are building for our customers and consumers, business platforms, and applications that we build for our employees. And with this level of connectivity ambition, I mean, you can imagine that the attack surface, it's so large, and security becomes even more pivotal.
Yeah, very ambitious, that end-to-end connectivity and the excitement, but like you said, the challenges that actually provokes. So how does identity security integrate into Heineken's general overall strategy?
Yeah, so security has to be integral, holistic, and also automated. I think very few times we hear this word security and automation, because I would say the trust is not always there. So I think that is really important to embed that in design so that we can prevent our organizations potentially to be hurt by threats that will affect productivity, revenue, or brand. And at the same time, in the intersection of disruptive technologies, we heard earlier in the panel discussion that their traditional enterprise security parameters is no longer effective. So when there is no more parameter, only identity can serve as the primary control.
Yeah, indeed. And in your opinion, what is the value of identity? What does it actually bring to the business?
Yeah, so having said that, I think identity access management is not only about security, right? So people not only want, but they also expect the same level of experience as they do at home and at the workplace. For example, when you subscribe to a Netflix service, you want that service to be instantly available upon subscription, same as when you download a service on your phone. So with that, IAM enables this frictionless authentication through single sign-on, taking the need to remember password away. That's great. And at the same time, to be productive and end the day fulfilled by the work they do, our employees need to have the right access to the right business platforms to do their job effectively.
Yeah, and just staying with your employees, trying to enable that sort of seamless experience for them. I think the audience would love to hear about your take on that, of how you go about that.
Yeah, so our global IAM system is connected to our global HR system, and each Heineken workforce has a digital identity. And with user lifecycle is triggered through the control of our global HR systems, where the creation, deletion, role changes, permissions, it's done through this process from user onboarding, transfer, and offboarding.
And how about your approach to your identity program with SailPoint so far? Spill the beans, we want to hear about it.
Yeah, so we were encouraged by market trends and to migrate to cloud-based platform. And we have rolled out Identity Now to several opcos with a more focus towards standardization and process offerings. And our identity program is actually brownfield. And it's not only just a tool replacement. We also focus to look at process, governance, and knowledge improvement.
And when you mention brownfield, it's basically utilising what you've got already rather than creating something new. Is that the right explanation for it? Or,
yeah.
Or how would you explain it?
That's right. So we have an existing legacy IAM system, which is on-premise, and it's already connected to hundreds of business platforms. So in our identity program, what we have done at the start, which is back in July, we actually connected our existing identity solution, legacy solution, with SailPoint Identity Now. And we were focusing a lot on data quality to make sure that data quality is preserved. At the same time, in Heineken, we have a lot of global applications which is shared across multiple opcos. So in our pilot phase, and also together with our agile ways of working to start smart and learned relentlessly. We cannot do it in a big bang because of this shared global application. Thus, we actually piloted that to 4 OpCos.
Well, indeed. So you mentioned about the pilot then. Any more detail you can give us through that journey? You mentioned about you started, I think it was in July, was it? So just give us a sense of how that went and the time frame. I think people will be really interested to hear that.
Yeah, so with the connection established with our legacy system, it acts as the provisioning engine. And we leverage on SailPoint Identity now modern UI and UX to be the front end for our end users. What we have done is with 4 operating companies, we have actually onboarded 7,500 employees on this SailPoint Identity now. And what we have defined also cross-application roles and approval groups for this pilot scope. And one thing which is really important and we are very proud of is also that we have defined together with a global functions birthright roles. And what I meant there is based on your particular job position in our global HR system, it automatically provisions the right roles to the users. So it eliminates the need for a line manager to request for access and the user is productive on day 1.
And you talked about 7,500 out of what, the 80,000. So obviously that's a strategic decision not to obviously do all 80,000. That would be madness, wouldn't it? You're having to do it in that stage approach. Love to know, what part does machine learning and AI play in all of this?
Yeah, so we are really excited to leverage on SailPoint predictive identity using AI ML to help us be more efficient in role modeling. At the same time, we are also very keen to learn how we can design certification campaigns, which is even more effective, so that we can remove certification fatigue from our users. So it's still very early days for us. We have only scratched the surface. And what we aim to do is actually to roll out Identity now, which we have branded internally as My Access, to 50 operating companies and migrate away from our existing IGA systems and connect to more business systems and more types of identities.
Now, this is your golden opportunity to tell us, what has the partnership been like between Heineken and SailPoint?
Yeah, so we are joining efforts with SailPoint and Heineken to design something which is fit for purpose, sustainable, and secure to be delivered in the next 3 years, right? So we trust in partnering with SailPoint, and we are confident that we will jointly secure the commitment to innovate and succeed together.
And what's next for the program?
I think next for us is it's actually very early days. So I would be really glad to answer the rest of this in 2 to 3 years' time. So yeah.
Yeah, okay. It will get you back maybe in 2 to 3 years' time.
That's right.
Yeah. And finally, Kamy, I think it'd be great to get your advice, what you'd like to share with the audience about multinational organisations with regards to managing their enterprise identity programme. So what advice would you give them, and what lessons have you learned along the way?
Yeah, so it's early days, right? So I would say that, welcome to be back in 2 to 3 years to answer this question fully, but I would advise others to focus really on the end users. Although IAM has a strong security focus, but it has a much more closer business relationship and intimacy with business processes such as user onboarding, access to business platforms and data to all kinds of users, workforce, customers, partners. And full enablement of IAM takes time, and it will succeed gradually with project success. But end user change approach, it is so important for this to get right. And with that, our focus is actually to focus on end users, and that is what is important for us. And brewing the joy of true togetherness is our focus for our green strategy. And that is where we want to become the best connected brewer as well.
Well, Kamy, absolutely fascinating to talk to you. Good luck with your evergreen strategy, and thank you so much for taking part in Identity TV today. Thank you so much, Kamy.
Thank you.
next victim. Wow, I really enjoyed that interview with Kamy. And just a reminder that if you have any questions or comments for our panel later on, please do submit them through the Q&A function. I know many of you have done so already, so keep them coming. Well, I'm delighted that we're now joined by Simon Riggs. Simon is currently an interim CISO and advisor. Before that, Simon spent 9 years as EMEA's regional CISO for Bank of America, and further back, he was global head of IT security at Thomson Reuters. He also has extensive experience in risk, change delivery, and good old Sarbanes-Oxley and general IT controls governance. Simon, welcome to Identity TV. Great to have somebody here of your experience, and I'm looking forward to hearing what you have to say on the topic. So thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you. I'm thrilled to be here.
Yeah, great. So obviously during the pandemic, many of us had to work from home. So can you share some of the approaches that you think is important to think about when it comes to hybrid working and controlling access?
Yes, absolutely. So look, clearly the attackers have developed and expanded their tactics while we've had people working from home, sort of exploit them when they're in a more vulnerable state. And people clearly are much more vulnerable when they're working from their kitchen table than when they're working in the office, when they are obviously otherwise reminded of organisational norms and cultural expectations. So I think in those circumstances, it's important that we double down on end user training and awareness so that they are reminded about those security principles and appropriate practices that we expect them to follow. And so they're not taken advantage of by the threat actors. And in addition, the importance of being really on top of that disciplined work around patching endpoints. When folks are working away from the office, that's sometimes harder to achieve for many organisations. It's tough enough in our regular offices, let alone when they're working remotely. And when they're working off their own equipment, you know, your ability to feel assured that they're working on a platform which is secure, regardless of the fact they're coming over an appropriately connected interface to the office, such as VPN, you know, that's an additional worry. I think overall, though, your ability to look after your employees when they're working remotely or on the road is often driven by visibility. And visibility is key to all of this. You just clearly can't keep secure what you don't know about. And so that insight is super important.
Yeah, well said. Now, at the beginning of the show, I mentioned about the PwC Global CEO Survey.
Yes.
And CEOs, you know, are finally, after many, many years, prioritising cybersecurity. They understand it as being that major risk to their strategy and operations. So how do you see identity security playing a role in enabling and protecting businesses?
Well, I think, first of all, it's a really important trade-off of understanding how you keep the individuals and the business as a whole safe, and yet at the same time allowing the business to do business. We are, of course, doing security because we want to allow a business to operate, not for the sake of doing good security alone. And, you know, today we're talking about identity. So if we zone in on that, I think the most important thing here is the objective of making sure that legitimate credentials aren't being misused, either by the individual or that somebody else has taken over their credentials and perhaps even unknowingly to the original user, taking advantage of that to perform some bad stuff in an organisation. But we need to know, in order to be able to keep on top of that, what people need to do in order to perform their job. So what access do they need to legitimately carry out? And some of the other presenters have already spoken about that. And I think on the back of a true understanding of what somebody needs to perform their role, them being really rigorous about removing all the other ancillary stuff that they may have gathered as additional entitlements, often when they've worked in an organisation for a long time, which they no longer need for their job. And by doing so, we can reduce the risk, which is super important. But of course, that is always easier said than done. I think in today's world, we all face an increasing amount of complexity. The volumes of entitlements go up. The fact that we are pushing some of our workload into the cloud, so we have a hybrid environment to try and navigate, and an ever-increasing regulatory burden, often across jurisdictions which may well contradict with one another, makes that a really challenging space for the IT and the cyber organisation to get right. And I couldn't agree with the other presenters more when they say that really now using a scalable AI and machine learning based approach is probably for the first time giving us the tools to really manage an identity platform properly.
I also referred to the World Economic Forum earlier on, their report, which I urge people to read actually, and it identifies that 85% of cyber leaders agree that cyber resilience and risk is a business priority for their organisation, and you'd expect them to, because that's what they do day in, day out. But how do you go about getting the rest of the business to understand the importance of cyber risks and investing in platforms like identity security?
It's a common conundrum. And I think people talk about the need to do it. It has to be a business conversation. You need to talk about it in terms of business risk and the issues related to the business when we get this wrong, and not to allow yourself just to talk about cyber and identity as purely a technical matter, because it won't get the attention you deserve. Ultimately, you have to get the message across to the executive team of an organisation to help them understand that cyber, and by extension in today's conversation, identity and the issues of getting identity wrong, could fundamentally turn into a tier one, almost an existential risk for an organisation, and therefore it has to be taken super seriously. We need to get top-down support from an organisation, whether or not that's at the board, your audit committee, your executive team. And I think if you can establish that properly, you have a fighting chance of setting the right organisational tone. You can get your budgets approved, and overall you can clear the decks to make sure your initiatives are properly prioritised and you can execute on them well. And in all of that, identity platforms clearly are going to play a very crucial role. I think they are key to being able to articulate and describe the risks you're facing around identity misuse, but probably even more importantly in today's litigious environment, it gives you the ability to demonstrate to stakeholders, whether or not those are internal stakeholders or perhaps your external auditors and maybe even your regulators, that you do have effective controls in place and that you can evidence that they are running well.
Yeah, indeed. And I think, getting the board setting that tone and strategy, that is so well said, because actually that's really where things need to happen and change and then to filter down. But everyone plays a part in making it happen. You've already mentioned about technologies, sort of artificial intelligence and machine learning. So I just want to tap into that a little bit more. So how do you see those type of technologies within an identity platform actually supporting companies?
I think it's nothing less than transformational, to be honest. And if we pause for a moment, look back to maybe even recent history, we would all recognise in all of our organisations that we've worked in the past, the business as usual, BAU workflows are just really hard. They're riddled with manual steps. That's got worse as we start to now introduce cloud elements to what we've traditionally done on-prem. It's probably fair to describe it as being a bit of a mess, in fact, a big mess. And today now, the ability to use AI, machine learning, I think is fundamentally key to navigating and dealing with the scale of the challenge in terms of volume. But coming with that becomes really interesting tooling. So, the ability to deploy effective tooling, and we heard about Heineken, to allow you to deal with repetitive, low-value tasks, is really exciting, because you can turn, through the use of automation, those routine activities into something that just gets taken care of. And most importantly, you can free up your people to really spend time on value-added work where they concentrate on what they've learned from the process and the data rather than just processing the data. But actually getting there is really hard. And I would probably, call out three things I would particularly recommend to people to think about. So they need to try and keep it really simple. Don't over-engineer the solutions, build upon it in sensible, logical blocks, get some points on the board and move forward. Number two, I would really stress, you need to streamline the authentication and identity management processes, not just because that's a good idea, and clearly it is, but we want to make the user and potentially even the customer experience as smooth as possible. We need to make it a good experience for them. And thirdly, I think it's really important to deliver just enough timely access on a kind of least privileged basis to allow people to do their job. And even better, if you can build a model that allows you to assess whether or not those entitlements are actually being used and to automatically revoke them if that's not the case, in order to continually keep on top of your identity and your entitlements to make sure it's as efficient but also as locked down as you can make it.
Yeah, I like those three areas you said, and actually the least privileged access, I think I'll probe the panel later on about that. I'd like to get their thoughts on it, because I think that's a really interesting area. Want to find out now about that interwoven relationship between structured and unstructured data and how that is a growing concern and how you manage that. So the differences between cloud environments and the devices used to access resources further promote complexity, don't they? And it's difficult to know which users and which service accounts have access. So how do you see identity platforms helping customers resolve these challenges? And I just want to get your take on that structured and unstructured data as to how critical that is going forward.
Well, I think fundamentally it boils down to the whole notion of automation. And that becomes ever more important for us as we move into a cloud environment, that we need to, as I had already described, make sure those processes are as automated and as frictionless as possible. Clearly, you need to be really crisp about how you define your target operating model for this activity. And once you have a very solid and agreed understanding of how that's going to operate, then you need to architect your identity platform accordingly to make sure that your execution meets your plan. But as you rightly say, I think structured data is quite easy to navigate. It's the unstructured data where people often get caught out. And I am forever surprised, even now, as to how much sensitive, confidential data gets migrated to cloud platforms in particular, outside of the boundaries of our traditional organization, but with little thought around the policy or access controls that need to go hand in hand with that. That's just not keeping up, and that will catch people out. So, to your question, I think it's critically important that people understand both where the unstructured data is, and once you have a handle on that, to spend the time thoughtfully understanding how you're going to classify, define, and manage that data, in line with the sensitivity of the data and what it demands from you.
And just to be clear, when we're talking about unstructured data, we're talking about the likes of Google Docs and so on and so forth.
Of course, yeah.
Yeah.
The fact that people may be storing credit card details or payroll data in stores which are outside of the normal corporate databases. Maybe they've downloaded some data because they want to do some manipulation and business intelligence on it, some management reporting. They do that management reporting, but you find that they leave behind this breadcrumb trail of data in your organization that just shouldn't be there.
Now, I was reading a recent ESG report because I knew you were coming on the show, so I thought, I've got to do my homework for you. And it mentioned that the top causes of data loss from cloud stores include insider threats, user negligence, use of personal devices, over-permissive credentials and stolen credentials. I don't think this is anything new to you, which further highlights the connection between cloud identities and the protection of sensitive data. So how does identity security actually overcome insider threat and the management of those over-permissioned users?
Indeed. And when we talk about insiders, I think we need to recognise and cater for the fact sometimes they're just silly mistakes our employees make, but they're trying to do the right thing. And at the other end of the scale, we may have employees who are fundamentally going out of their way to do something unhelpful, and they know they're doing it. And regardless of which end of the scale you're talking about, having visibility and understanding of what's going on is key to your ability to be able to manage that. So really this boils down to, you have to understand who has access to the data. If you don't understand that, then you're not going to be able to work from there. And once you understand who has access, you do need to understand how they got that access. And perhaps most importantly, Nadine, once you understand that, you need to understand what they're doing with that access. And that goes across applications and data, not just one or the other. And I think once you have a grasp of that situation, that sort of almost that situational awareness, then you need to understand, based upon those risks and any anomalies you've identified, you have to then take action. So you need a platform that enables you, or at least facilitates you, making informed decisions based upon that access understanding you've got. And the even better if would be that if you can integrate that sort of insight and capability with things like user behavior and analytic tools to both understand what somebody could be doing and what they are actually doing, you're setting yourself up well to take good, effective action when you see a situation falling outside of your risk tolerance. No longer do we need to just rely upon human interpretation. We're being much more programmatic and considered about effective execution.
I like that situational awareness. I'm going to remember that. Now, I've reported on all sorts of data breaches over the years, and just one that springs to mind is a year ago, a hospitality company in Delaware in the United States had a breach, a security breach, a major one. And I mention it because actually around 2/3 of your Fortune 500 companies are incorporated within Delaware, simply because they like the way that the legal and the company structures are there, and the chancery section as well. But it was interesting because actually I've got a quote here from the Vice Chancellor Laurie W. Will of the Delaware Court of Chancery, stated that it was necessary to increasingly call upon directors to ensure that companies have appropriate oversight systems in place when it comes to cyber risk. And that just got me thinking, how do you see regulations and court decisions shaping the future of cybersecurity, and how much will identity governance be a factor or evidence of compliance?
I think it's a really important reminder. It reinforces what we've actually understood for a long time, that there is a distinct board obligation, almost a fiduciary responsibility, to protect shareholder value. And so in the context of today's conversation, that means that we require those boards and organisations to set the tone of taking security very seriously. And yet I am concerned, because in many cases you talk to boards or people operating at that level, and they have neither the skill nor the training in many cases to ask the right questions to allow them to discharge their roles. You know, their role is to challenge an organisation and an organisation's management as to whether or not things are being done appropriately. And business leaders themselves still, as well, aren't being well supported, in my view, by good legislation, by currently. We need good regulations to help guide good practice, and I'm not sure that we are really there yet today. It's getting better, but we've got further to go. And despite that, the regulatory requirements, the backdrop, and we were talking about things like GDPR and other issues like, and I'm overwhelmingly excited to talk not only about US SOX, but potentially the forthcoming UK SOX.
Say it in its full name. Go on. Sarbanes-Oxley.
You know, a dinner party would never be the same again without these sorts of words, would we? I'd get invited everywhere. So those issues will make it incredibly important for UK companies, particularly, to start getting this right. For UK companies who've long for a while said, actually, this is a US issue around SOX, I don't need to worry about that. That's going to cause them a bad day in the office because it's coming pretty soon and it will hit them very hard. So on the basis of that, we need to help organisations understand that they really need to get a good grip on controls and access, in particular across their organisation, to meet those expectations, right down to a single identity, because a single identity could give you a control failure, and that's really not a good place to be. The implication of getting this wrong is that you will end up having very difficult conversations with your external auditors, and potentially, depending upon what sector you're in, it may even be with the regulators, and that's never a good place to be.
Finally, we've got time for one last question, Simon. It's been very, very thought-provoking what you've said so far. We know managing users can be hard. Getting investment in cyber programmes from the board can be a challenge. Protecting the business while it wants to rapidly innovate, transform and embrace flexible working can seem impossible. So what would you say to the audience briefly about how identity security can be an enabler to support them, based on everything you've said?
Yeah, I think it's a really great question. I'd probably say that unless you nail the issue of building a comprehensive identity security strategy, whether or not that's for on-prem or cloud environments, you're really going to struggle to deliver an effective transformation, a digital transformation within your organisation. The UK's Cybersecurity Centre, the National Cybersecurity Centre, specifically calls out identity management as a critical element to any organisation's protection. But we need identity platforms now more than ever to be adaptable. We need them to be able to scale. And as we heard from Kamy at Heineken, it needs to grow with an organisation to allow this to operate well. I think ultimately all of this underscores the fact that we really have no option. This is not a discretionary area, but to understand the importance of who has access to our stuff, why, and how it's being used.
Yeah, thank you so much. Wise words. Well, thank you so much for your insights and perspectives, Simon. And remember to keep your questions and comments coming in. We now have a quick ad break, and then we'll be back with our second expert panel session. I'll see you soon. Now let's welcome back our experts to talk about the big challenge facing all enterprises today. What am I talking about? The digital transformation. Yes, true digital transformation even. Anywhere operations, multi-cloud environments, IoT device management, the democratization of IT. There's a lot to take in when it comes to digital transformation. Identity security is at the heart of it all, enabling and protecting organisations as they change. So welcome back, panellists. I'm glad you stayed around. My first question to you all is, while digital transformation drives cloud adoption, it also exposes organisations to greater cyber risk. So Karl, if I can start with you, how does identity security protect an organisation from that risk?
If you think about the shift that's been made from plan and build to consume and configure, what we're seeing in organisations is massive attack surface growth, exponential, and it's very difficult to control. And also, traditional perimeters have suddenly disappeared overnight. So identity being right at the centre of that means, actually, if you know who has access, why they have access, and is it appropriate for that time, you're putting yourself in a very good position to secure the enterprise.
Well, we have a question in from Paul Blair. Paul, thank you so much for your questions. And you've already, I think I already asked this one actually, who is better placed to own and maintain identity and access management? So we've done that one, we can tick that one off. How about this one from Fabrizio Gamboa? Now, hopefully I've pronounced the name correctly. Did it sound right to you?
Well, in all my Italian expertise, sure.
Yeah, great. So how do you sell this view and vision of identity to senior leadership to get funding? So that's interesting, isn't it? I think that's probably based on what Simon has just said. Rob, what's your thoughts on that, if you'd like that one?
Yeah, I think it's a really good question, actually, and it's not something that has a simple answer, but it is something that you absolutely need to get stakeholder support for. Because if you're applying a security policy or check at the end of a project, it's too late. You have very minimal chance of getting the controls and the investment you need or the time you need. And we've seen applications launched and products launched where that model has been employed. So you need to make sure that your stakeholders are engaged early in the process and make sure they understand that actually if they embed security and identity, and at the start of that project or program, then they'll have a much smoother ride straight through to launching that program. And then we're seeing more of the board taking an interest in cyber risk. And actually, I've visited customers who have cyber risk as a metric at board level. So it's really good to make sure that, as well as embedding and shifting left in terms of security engagement, you're also helping the board to hold the stakeholders to account for the cyber risk.
Yeah, I've definitely seen that shift as well, more of recent years in that board engagement as too, and more to be done as well. That's something that they've got to keep their focus on. If I can turn to you, Karl, according to research by Aqua Security, 90% of organisations are vulnerable to security breaches caused by cloud misconfigurations. So how does identity security overcome this?
Absolutely. So the rapid adoption of cloud that we see by our customers, not just our technology, but further cloud technologies, our partners in the industry, that has to be a repeatable, guardrailed process. Having identity and having those guardrails of policy-based access for these different applications as we onboard them, these data sets, really do mean that this can be a rinse and repeat, highly auditable, continually monitored process that really does allow you to do things like introduce separation of duty, segregation of duty, layers as you adopt those different technologies, allows everyone to be on the same picture as well. All the teams know what to expect then when you're onboarding, and maybe when you're in an M&A process as well. There's lots and lots of sort of turmoil at that time. If people know what to expect in terms of when users come in, how their accesses will be determined, and how it'll be monitored. A good identity security program will allow for all of that.
Just very quickly, Karl, cloud misconfigurations, what would you say?
Very easy to do. The scale of permissions, roles, and entitlements in cloud is huge. I think last check, it's like 2,000. Pick your kind of cloud platform for that. What I think makes a successful transformation project is leading with empathy and using technology to provide some of that empathy to the teams you mentioned, Caro. The SRE engineers, how are they going to make sure they apply least privilege without those supporting technologies? It's a very difficult challenge.
And just, Rob, just on that, ownership of cloud security, perspectives on that, what would you say?
Yeah, so, again, we need to build a culture of security ownership because that means that your business is going to be able to innovate at speed. But to do that, we need to shift left. We need to engage and create those security stakeholders at the early stage. So they're designing well. It's secure by design. And identity is an absolutely critical part of that process. Having a good identity process isn't going to solve your configuration issues, but if you have the guardrails in place and you're monitoring those, then you can look to make sure that the right policies are in place for the right time and for the right reasons.
We've got a question in from Niles from Holland, so hello to you. Some organisations develop and run a large number of applications and thus have a need for very fine-grained RBAC. How do systems like SailPoint support delegating the role management in such cases? So, Caro, to you, please.
Very much. Thanks, Niles. Great question.
9 votes for that one as well.
9
Very
votes,
popular.
great. Well, we'll tackle that one. So, again, there's a couple of different ways you can come at sort of fine-grained entitlements. So, a really good identity strategy program will start with that piece of BA work. What are we actually looking to, what roles are we looking to create on each application? Who needs them? Do they need them permanently? If they are fine-grained, can they be role-based? Can they be sunsetted? How fine-grained do they need to be? I've said this for 15 years. I'm that interesting. I've said it 15 years. If it's very fine-grained, should it be in a role? Don't make your roles, don't have as many roles as you have people. Don't tie yourself in knots. Have roles where they make sense. And sometimes it makes more sense from a least privilege point of view to allocate access and sunset it. So, use the BA work, use things like the search capabilities and identity now to understand who has what accesses, what's been aggregated, who has the accesses now, and what do we actually need to automate versus what can be individually allocated and revoked.
I'd love to know how you two are working together. How are SailPoint and AWS working together?
Sure.
Rob, do you want to say?
Yeah, I'm gonna talk about this a lot actually in my my talk later on.
Yeah.
But
just give a glimpse.
Yeah, so SailPoint is a security competency partner for AWS. So that means that they've built solutions that integrate deeply with the services that customers use. So that means that you're integrated with things like EventBridge and SSO. So customers can actually use a source of identity, and then that carries through to all of the services that they're using on AWS. And I think that's particularly important for customers when they're moving from an on-prem or maybe a hybrid environment into the cloud, is they need to know that the solutions will work as well in the cloud as they do in the on-prem environment, and that they're architected well and correctly for the cloud.
Absolutely. And additionally, we host heavily on AWS as well. So all of our cloud technology are hosted. We have excellent connectivity, very fast adoption, and it's a wonderful working relationship.
Karl, I'm leaving you out there, so they're going to get you to answer the next one. I'll get everybody to have a take on it as well. But finally, how can automation and machine learning strengthen a company's overall security position in the context of identity and also digital transformation?
I think the way I think about that is more audit, more problem. Like, you've got so much data and so much volume of information that you need to get through. Machine learning, AI, it's really going to cut through the noise and help bring to the surface, these are the important things you need to look at on a daily basis. These are the entitlements that are being misused. This is the information that's pertinent to the security team, but also to the operation team. We're seeing a degradation of performance here. Logins take longer. I think it will put it right at the front and center of, again, take an identity-first approach of transformation to say, this is the best way you can secure things, this is how we know, and this is what a user is doing on a daily basis.
Rob, any thoughts?
Yeah, I think it's really a key process. So we need to make sure that, as customers migrate onto the cloud, that they're able to do that at speed. So having those guardrails in place is absolutely key. And then you're looking at monitoring for exceptions to that. So once you have the guardrails in place that allow people to do what they need to do, are they doing something silly? Like, are they, configuring an admin account when they don't need an admin account and running at the production workload? That's something that can be picked up by AI. And we really need to stop our level 1, level 2 analysts looking at things that are really, really simple to fix. And that's where machine learning, I'll use that term rather than AI, is really, really good at doing. It helps them scale, which means when you need those analysts to have that human eye view and add context to an issue, they can do that because they're not dealing with the basic tasks that you could automate.
Caro, just a very brief comment from you on that.
Absolutely. We're really all about defending against those bad actors. Those bad actors are minxes. They will stop at nothing. Ultimately, what we're trying to do here is use those, automate as much as we can, AI, ML, trying to make sure that we reduce where we can, reduce that access, get it back.
Well, thank you very much to our panel for another stimulating discussion. Let's take a short ad break, and we're going to be back with Rob Hale from AWS going solo to talk about why security is job zero.
As the adoption of the AWS cloud platform continues to skyrocket, so does a new breed of potential security challenges. A staggering 80% of cloud breaches are due to customer misconfiguration, mismanaged credentials, or insider theft. Proper management and governance of your AWS environments has never been more critical. To stay secure requires visibility into your entire infrastructure to discover who has access to what, while enforcing policies to block unauthorized individuals. It also means meeting regulations and responding quickly to auditors. In the ever-changing cloud environment, a human-based approach is time and resource intensive and just won't do. SailPoint, the leader in enterprise identity security, protects your mission-critical AWS resources. Manage and govern all access to AWS infrastructure together with your applications and data from a single pane of glass with centralized visibility and a consistent set of controls. With the power of SailPoint, you can gain visibility and control, discover a complete view of users' access within AWS and across the enterprise, get enhanced visibility for federated access to AWS, identify and revoke unused access that can create risk. Automate access and self-service IT. Include AWS Access as part of your automated provisioning processes. Model, create, and update policies dynamically with the power of AI. Provide AI-based recommendations, helping decide if it's safe to grant user access. And ensure privacy and compliance. Provide auditors with the how, when, why, what, and who of AWS access. Rely on a single source of compliance reporting, including all direct and indirect AWS access. And comply with growing industry and federal regulations. SailPoint provides complete visibility and control to protect your organization's mission-critical AWS resources. Visit us online today to get started.
Hello, and welcome to a brief talk about security and identity and how making security job zero helps organizations innovate and build faster on the AWS cloud. My name is Rob Hale, and I lead AWS's security partner segment in EMEA. And I help partners such as SailPoint build and deliver innovative security solutions which delight our customers and help to improve your security posture. I'm honoured to be here today to talk to you as we start to come together again after the pandemic and meet in person, as I know many of you are together around the world today. So in this talk, I hope to give you some insight into how customers are using security best practice to enable digital transformation, while shifting left, and we've covered that earlier, and how identity is a critical component of that journey. I want to start by saying that you may have heard the saying that Amazon, every day is day one. Well, if every day is day one, then I can tell you security at AWS is job zero. It's one of the many reasons I joined AWS and something I believe passionately about. So I hope you'll agree that the basis of an effective security policy and posture must include a strong identity foundation. In fact, the very first tool you use when you sign up for an AWS account is an identity and access security tool. That tool creates your identity on the AWS cloud, and you configure that identity with security permissions as a role. And in the cloud, everything has an identity, whether it's an EC2 instance, a Lambda script, or even a human being. When we talk to customers, they often tell us about the challenges they face when they're trying to maintain and manage security of their on-premises infrastructure. So why is security so traditionally challenging? One challenge is a lack of visibility. In an on-premises environment, it can be difficult to know what resources and data are out there at any given time. Where's that data moving? Who's utilizing it? Who's accessing it? For example, it requires expensive, complex tooling to get an accurate real-time asset inventory. Most organizations just don't have that level of visibility that they'd like in an on-premises environment. And without visibility, it's really not easy for organizations to adequately secure their infrastructure and their data to meet their security and compliance requirements. A second challenge is the low degree of automation, and we've covered that earlier on in a panel session. So many organizations are trying to get rid of manual processes, including manual processes to remediate issues. So if you're copying and pasting information from one tool to another, or if you're manually applying patches, that just might indicate that you have a low degree of automation. Manual processes tend to lead to inconsistent execution, longer wait times to address all systems, and in many cases, it disrupts the customer experience. The goal of automation is therefore to programmatically handle tasks that would otherwise be done manually. And this is much easier in the cloud, as we'll see. So this combination of a lack of visibility into their own environment, coupled with a low degree of automation, compromises an organization's ability to move quickly and to effectively secure their on-premises infrastructure. When customers talk about what's important to them as they move into the AWS cloud, they consistently tell us about these 5 key areas. And when choosing their cloud provider, customers also consistently want security solutions that are built on the AWS cloud that integrate deeply with the services that they care about. Whether that's underlying services such as EC2 for compute, storage such as S3, or container services such as AWS's Elastic Container Service, or security and identity services such as IAM and SSO. At Amazon, one of our key security tenets is to keep people away from data. Identity is critical to be able to achieve that. In fact, when you look at AWS's well-architected framework, implementing a strong identity foundation is right at the top of that list. And actually, SailPoint inherits many benefits from using AWS. In addition to earning security and digital workspace competencies within our partner program, SailPoint hold a number of AWS validated solutions and use cases which customers can use. By operating on AWS, SailPoint also inherits global security and compliance, plus the ability to scale and automate those processes. AWS customers rely on AWS to gain control and confidence they need to securely run their business with the most flexible and secure cloud computing environment available today. As an AWS customer, you can benefit from the AWS data centers and a network which is architected to protect your information, identities, applications, and devices. With AWS, you can improve your ability to meet core security and compliance requirements, such as data locality, protection, confidentiality. Today, AWS protects millions of active customers around the world. Our customers represent diverse industries with a wide range of use cases, including large enterprises, small nimble startups, educational institutions, government organizations. And the scale and reach of those customers gives us broad visibility and deep perspective on cloud security. This is knowledge which we rapidly reinvest back into our leading edge infrastructure and services, and AWS is the only commercial cloud that has its service offerings and associated supply chain vetted and accepted as secure enough for top secret workloads. AWS allows you to automate manual security tasks so you can shift your focus to scaling and innovating your business. Plus, you pay only for the services that you use. Use AWS to transform the way you do business by automating security and compliance tasks to reduce risk, freeing up your business resources so you can focus on your customers and your core business needs. As a long-term AWS partner, SailPoint leverages all of these benefits and translates them to you when they deliver identity security. AWS supports more security standards and compliance certifications than any other offering, including PCI DSS, HIPAA, high-tech FedRAMP. You've heard about Sarbanes-Oxley, GDPR, FIPS, and NIST. And this helps customers satisfy compliance requirements for virtually every regulatory agency around the world. What you see here is just a small subset of the large number of standards and certifications that AWS offers to help satisfy compliance requirements. Note that actually this list also includes G-Cloud from the United Kingdom and C5 from Germany. AWS regularly achieves third-party validation for thousands of global compliance requirements. And we continually monitor those to make sure we're helping customers and partners meet the security and compliance standards for finance, for retail, healthcare, government, and beyond. This means SailPoint also inherits the most comprehensive and latest set of security and compliance controls. SailPoint achieves scale with Identity Now due to its cloud-native architecture that runs on AWS, leveraging security and compliance. With AWS, you control where your data is stored, who can access it, what resources they're using and consuming at any given moment. Customers can reduce risk as they scale using our security automation and activity monitoring services to detect suspicious security events, and this includes detecting configuration changes across your ecosystem. You can even integrate our services with existing solutions, and that means you can support workflows, streamline your operations, and simplify compliance reporting. One example of this is that SailPoint could deliver workflows based on its integration with Amazon EventBridge, and that's in addition to a long list of AWS services that it already integrates with. So hopefully many of you are aware and probably familiar with our shared responsibility model. Customers are responsible for security in the cloud, and AWS is responsible for security of the cloud. For customers, their responsibility is determined by the AWS services they use. So this determines the amount of configuration work the customer must perform as part of their security responsibilities. For example, services such as Amazon Elastic Compute, Amazon VPC, and Amazon S3 are categorized as infrastructure as a service. And so they require more input from the customer to perform all the necessary security configuration checks and make sure that the management tasks are completed. If a customer deploys an Amazon EC2 instance, they are responsible for the management of that guest operating system, including all the policies and application and the software configured on it. Each of those services also has a firewall attached to it, and that's called security groups within AWS. So hopefully it'll give you a view of security on AWS. I'm really, really pleased to be here. But I just wanted to finish by saying that AWS is responsible for the security of the cloud and protecting the infrastructure that runs all of our services offered in the AWS cloud. This infrastructure is composed of the hardware, the software, the networking, and the facilities that run AWS cloud services. This means that for our customers, you can focus on your choice of security configuration that's right for your business and the level of risk, together with SailPoint's identity security. That means you can meet your security and compliance standards, provision with confidence, and start to automate and manage and govern access in real time with AI-enhanced visibility and controls. You can comply with certainty because you can continuously govern access, track usage, and enforce policy across all users, apps, and data. So I want to take this opportunity to thank you for your time and attention, and I hope this talk was useful. Thank you.
Well, thanks very much, Rob. And that was brilliant to hear about why security is job zero. So far on Identity TV, we've heard how identity is transforming, how it can make or break security. We've also heard how Heineken is embracing cloud and why identity is important from a CISO's perspective, as well as highlighting that security is job zero. Now, as the third and final panel, our experts will give us their insights into what makes a successful, well-paced identity program. But where do you start? How do you ensure it delivers outcomes that are of value to the business? But before I actually find out your perspectives on that, earlier on you probably heard me talking with Simon, and we were talking about the subject of least privilege. I'd love to hear your take on least privilege and how identity ties into that. Karl, can you start, please?
Well, it's my favourite, so absolutely. Least privilege for me is an incredible topic because it's a concept that's been around since the 80s, but people have really struggled to implement it in an organisation. And when I used to be in the position that I would administer large networks, I always felt I made it when I became a domain administrator. I became an enterprise administrator. And that rank of having a privileged account meant something. The issue with that now is, as all of the operating systems that are common in a enterprise network exist, it's a very binary thing. You're either an administrator or you're not. So you end up with a lot of overprivileged accounts in the environment that can make very wide-reaching changes, essentially being the golden ticket for an attacker to make their way into your network, around your network, and compromise your environment. So least privilege is the concept of taking all that away, stripping it back to just what the user needs at that time to fulfill that task.
Rob, good to hear your take on it too.
Yeah, really good points actually. And I do kind of look back to 90s and 2000s and kind of think actually it's all static security, and security cannot be static. And absolutely your point on getting there as a system admin is absolutely what a lot of admins want to do. That's gives them the ability to do their role. But they don't need that access all the time. And actually a much better way to do that is to have dynamic policies, roles that are then assigned when they need those permissions. And that limits the blast area for any compromise of their accounts. And obviously you need to have controls like multi-factor authentication and contextual-based security to know why they're accessing a resource, what they're doing with it, and when they're able to do it, and from what device. We are We have thousands of employees around the world working from our kitchen counters now.
But how do you manage third-party roles and contractors, though?
Yeah, and that's another really good example of making sure that you have those roles defined and you know what that contractor should be doing. Limit their access as well. You know, they might be capable of accessing far more than you think, and test as well. So one of the biggest lessons that we see, in particularly in enterprise, we have large rule bases of different policies, is that people may think that their policy is more restrictive than it is. And actually, when they look at what people can access versus what they should be able to access, there's often a delta there that they need to address.
Indeed. I'm going to go straight, if you don't mind, to a question here for John from the US of A. John Malone, is great to have your question. What advice would you give to companies who want to start switching to role-based access control? Does identity management also apply to external websites with their own login requirements? Who wants that one?
Well, so we're starting with external websites. I would say it really depends on whether you're using it for a business function. If you're using it for a business function, you should absolutely be attempting to monitor this. This really comes back to that business analysis point that we made earlier, the real foundation, and it's what Kamy was saying, that agile approach, understanding exactly what you've got out there, using identity now to, I mean, it absolutely does wonders for, in those initial phases where you're in a transformation of, we want to start going to role-based access. What's out there? Who's accessing what? How do we go about zapping, my favourite onomatopoeia, zapping those existing accesses that we don't really need anymore, that we're confident we don't need, layering the segregation of duty matrices on top so that we can start to see where those clashes are and bringing them in. But it really starts with understanding what you've got and cleaning up. You don't have to wait till you've done the clean-up to get an identity solution in. That will help you with it. It'll help you immensely.
I like to hear the programme's very educational as well, with some brilliant grammar being thrown in. Fabulous.
Thanks.
Karl, in the near future, it's likely we're going to see cyber attacks that use robotic process automation, machine learning, and also that deep learning. I mean, criminals are already using AI, aren't they, to industrialise attacks. So what are the foundations for an identity programme that can actually minimise these risks?
I think to begin with, attack surface, like what is connected to your network. Take an understanding of, is it a really good idea to bring in an internet-connected dishwasher, give that administration rights because it needs to talk to something? Absolutely not. Stay away from that. So once you've gone over that attack surface and thought, what is an attacker going to find attractive about my business? What is it that makes them money? Like, what can they hold me ransom for? What can they sell on? What could they pass over to another third party? And putting controls around that high-value piece of information or data first, then ultimately starting to think about least privilege as a concept, building it one stage further and think about reputational damages as well. Like if someone got hold of the Twitter account on a Friday night of BeyondTrust, might be a different wake-up for the PR team on a Monday morning. And moving beyond that, I would say the final thing to consider is empathy for rolling that out. Like there are a lot of people in an organisation that are working today, and not breaking that workflow for them is very important.
Well, obviously, time is pressing. And a final question, how do each of you see identity programmes evolving in the next 3 to 5 years? And if you could throw in also your 3 top recommendations for an identity programme. Rob?
Yeah, I think we're going to see, more of what we're seeing now. So we're going to see, users wanting access to more data, to more applications, from more devices, from more locations. So you need to have a consistent single sign-on infrastructure based on a strong identity foundation. That means that they can access the things they need to. Because if they can't access the things they need to, they're either going to be unproductive, or they're going to be trying to find ways around the controls to be productive. So we need to make sure that we're scaling to that. And scale is the biggest challenge for security at the moment, whether that's looking at how we're being attacked and scanned by threat actors, or whether that's looking at how do we keep up with the business as it innovates, as it digitizes into the cloud. And so I would, in terms of 3 things to look at, I've mentioned it a few times today, so strong identity foundation. It should be the first thing you look at. Everything needs to flow from that identity foundation. And as I said before, everything in the cloud is an identity. Second thing is think how you're going to scale. How are you going to make sure your policies are applied to your entire environment? That's a hybrid environment, that's a cloud environment, third-party websites in a consistent manner, and then test. How can you test that to make sure that what you think is in place is actually in place, and make that a continual program of checking access and, if needed, revoking access? So using roles and situational, contextually aware policies versus static, rules.
How about culture, very briefly?
Yeah, absolutely. And this is, probably one of the biggest learnings that we have as a business, is that security absolutely has to be, deep within your culture. We make everybody at Amazon security owners, so we're responsible for our own data. So if you want to know who has access to particular data, it's the person who owns that data who controls who has access. And you need to make sure that they are aware of the importance of the data and their role in protecting it. And then you start to see those policies and those best practices fed through into everything that we do as a business.
Karl, your take on identity programs and how they will evolve in the next 3 to 5 years?
Certainly more focus, particularly at the C-level, understanding, is it a cyber problem, is it a business problem? No, it's both. I think in terms of controls to bring in, very much focused on defensive controls, so things like privilege access management, identity governance are going to be key, because ultimately misuse of identity is going to be the number one way an attacker will be successful in attacking your business.
Recommendations? I'll allow you to have 3.
Discover what you have today, understand how it's being used, and then empower a workforce that can work from anywhere.
Nice and succinct. Caro, final words from you on this.
Thank you very much. So, wonderful learning today. I think we've all brought so many different angles to this. I would say that having that that unmatched intelligence is really the first part you need. I would say being able to get that 360 view of accounts, entitlements, like we said, who's using them, where they're using them. I would also say then really having that I think I've mentioned it a few times, that frictionless automation. How can we make this as seamless to the business? We want to enable them to do their jobs and keep them as secure as possible. Keep doing that, keep that as a focus point for your programme of work. And then finally, really allowing that comprehensive integration, allowing you to have a full flow through of access rights, of monitoring, of audit, is absolutely key to that successful programme of work.
Well, thank you so much more. I could spend all day talking to you three. I really appreciate your time today. So that I'd like to say thank you to our brilliant experts, Rob Hale, Karl Lankford and Caro Lawson, for sharing their wisdom on identity, security and just about everything in between, and giving us some grammar lessons as well. I'd also like to thank our guest speakers, Mike Kiser, Kamy and Simon Riggs, for their valuable perspectives too. And finally, big thanks to all of you in the audience for joining us and also contributing such thoughtful questions and comments. Well, I'm going to wrap things up in a moment, but you should be able to see a short survey on screen where we'd really appreciate you giving your feedback on Identity TV. It's only 8 questions and we'd be very grateful if you could complete it. Now, for those of you responsible for securing your companies, and I think that's most of you watching, the World Economics Forum Global Cybersecurity Outlook 2022, do read it, says that 42% of security leaders are concerned about infrastructure breakdown due to a cyber attack, while 24% fear identity theft. And furthermore, the UK's National Cyber Security Centre now lists identity and access management as one of their top 10 steps to cyber security. The importance of cyber resilience and identity security is clear. As Caro showed us, it can make or break your organisation. So to recap, what does good identity security look like? Your identity platform must have the ability to scale and transform at a pace never seen before. Your networks must be mapped thoroughly, with all endpoints adopting a zero trust approach. You should know who has access to what applications and focus on prevention by improving end user security training. That was a really important point. And finally, you need to build resilience into environments and strengthen relationships right across the business ecosystem. Well, we've nearly reached the end of today's Identity TV. Thanks to SailPoint for putting this broadcast together. We hope it's given you some useful information to use in your own identity journey. And if you have any questions or would like to talk further about anything, please don't hesitate to contact the team. The all-important email address for this is identitytv@sailpoint.com. Thank you again, and goodbye.
The way we do business is changing. The mix of technologies at our fingertips is now more diverse than ever. Providing your workforce with fast, secure access to critical resources has never been more important. In today's new world, you can't do business without technology, and you can't use technology without identity security. Now, it's possible to enable access and protect business everywhere with SailPoint. Drive your business forward with the unmatched visibility, intelligence, automation, and acceleration of access it needs for all identities, entitlements, systems, data, and cloud services. With SailPoint, you'll see value starting day one. Let our proven platform, methodology, team, and community work for you. Visit www.sailpoint.com to gain your badge of success today. SailPoint. Identity security for the cloud enterprise.